right, and our conversation continues on the state of Kenya's economy. I did speak with the Cabinet Secretary for Treasury, Mr. Henry Rotich. Now, that other conversation, we promised liquidity management. So just a quick one before we hear from the CS. That's a quick definition of what liquidity management means for you, Anzetse.
Well, I mean, it's one thing is money supply. How much money you're getting in and how much money are you spending? Because if you're spending more than you're getting in, you get a liquidity crunch, which is why people start talking about a credit crunch and we have no money and that sort of stuff.
So we asked him about that because a number of people are worried about just what this means and why we are borrowing to manage our liquidity issues. Let's listen.
What it means, I think I need to clarify. You know, when you're making, when your liquidity management is in a way lengthening some of your maturities. In a way, say debt matures today, and that was probably a 2-year debt, and you have gotten funds that are long term. It's like you restructure it in a way, maybe to put it in a simple way, and take up 10 or 20-year borrowing. So what you have done is taken a longer term debt and retire a maturing debt. That is just purely liquidity management to give you space to finance other expenditures. So that is what it means.
But is that what we're doing with it? Okay, but I do think we need to listen to the next one that just then explains what he meant further, because he was talking about maturing one, expiry of another, and moving it. I thought more clarification on that with respect to our borrowing. In simple terms, we are borrowing to pay another debt.
You can call it that way, you can, but that is exactly paying to pay a debt that you are using it for infrastructure. So
we're borrowing from one debt to pay another one.
That is
borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, essentially.
No. Yeah, I think that is you're putting it in a way that what I've just said is that you can lengthen your maturities depending on the prices you are getting.
Anzetse?
He's in a very difficult position, but what he's really trying to talk about is rolling debt over. One of the strategies that you do in fiscal policy when you're trying to manage your debt, particularly when liquidity is a bit tight, is that you try and get a cheaper loan to pay off the more expensive loan. That makes sense. One of the concerns I'm having is whether that's actually happening. Because what seems to be happening is that we're doing a lot of domestic borrowing and we're trying to retire these international debts when our domestic rates are a lot more expensive than what we're getting in international markets. I think that's one thing. I think one of the bigger problems that I'm having beyond sort of just the debt is our revenue generation and our inability to raise the money that we say we're going to raise. Now, the reason why that's such a big problem is that when these budgets are being tabled, they are going to use the forecasted revenue that is going to come in. So when that forecasted revenue doesn't come in, now our borrowing that we had said we're going to borrow this much, we end up borrowing a lot more. Okay. So I think those are some of the fundamental, structural problems in fiscal policy that I don't see being addressed, particularly on the revenue generation side.
Well, then let me ask a basic question, because I'm in good company tonight. Then should we be focusing our budgets on projected revenues? Because for the last 3 to 4 years, we have not met our revenue projections. In fact, in the first 4 months of this year, we're set to have fallen short by 50 billion. When I asked the CS, he put it at 40. Is there a different way to budget for every financial year without basing it on revenue projections, which we almost never meet, Phyllis?
The reality about revenue projections is we've not been meeting them. One of the challenges we have is that we are getting taxes from the same people. We have a big informal sector that is actually not part of the tax bracket. We keep talking about widening the tax bracket so that we have more people participating. Instead, what we are having is the same people taxed over and over again for the same things. And what happens to them is that they become less competitive. In the process, they are competing against imports, which are more competitive in the market, and they take their market share. Right. Then we are not able to generate that revenue internally. Our exports have also not been growing as much as they should, because ideally, if our manufacturing sector was growing as much as it really should for us to attain Vision 2030, we would have value-added exports being exported out of the country, our export sector growing, and more revenue coming into the country. So without that, it's a vicious cycle of the tax revenues not being met, the same people being taxed over and over again and not getting competitive enough. So we need to have a serious strategy as a country on how to bring in the informal sector into the tax bracket. Then we can have more people able to pay tax,
so
really concentrate on also growing the
money.
manufacturing sector and growing our exports, because that's the only way, and making agriculture more productive. That's the only way we can really generate that revenue that we require.
So how do we then bring in the informal sector? We've been talking about this, and I believe there's, you know, a discussion about regulation of our tax policy in the country. How do we bring more people into the tax bracket?
I think we have to get out of this conundrum of definitions. What is informal? Anybody who does a business here benefits from certain public investments to make sure their businesses work. They owe this government tax money. They have to be regularized. They have to be registered. They have to pay their taxes. I don't think there's any way around this.
Yeah, but have we then termed, you know, when we think of manufacturers and you know, Phyllis heads that body, we think of the big guys, you know.
But those guys are small.
Is it our thinking that we haven't? I mean,
they're a very small part in terms of...
If I bake cakes for a living, am I a manufacturer?
Well, you're producing some value. You're getting sugar and flour and water and electricity and
adding value
to
that.
Now, I think the real issue is, you know, and you have said that we haven't grown more than 5% over the last 5 years in terms of manufacturing expansion. I think we have to understand this, that the structural issues that Zesi was talking about have to be addressed. This economy is so skewed towards the service elements of the thing, which is basically consumption, which is conveyancing, which is moving things around, the logistics and all of that. The hard structure of the economy that should be durable over the long term is really manufacturing and value addition from agriculture. This is the space that is going to open the real potential that we have to tap into and bring everybody on the train of taxes and begin to add back to government revenue. But I think Mr. Rotich and his colleagues have to consider one very small thing. Households operate like that. It's pay as you go. The government is spending more than it takes in. And
so we're living beyond our means?
We're living beyond our means. And I think, in my view, there's a constitutional structural problem. There's a structural problem that is built in by the Constitution that is also creating this fiscal problem. I think there's still a lot of duplication between the national and the county governments. Our government, our bureaucracy is outsized. We haven't found the right levels. Mr. Kenyatta promised restructuring and reforms within state corporations. That hasn't happened in the last 5 years. We still have a lot of dead weight that we're carrying in the public sector. The other thing is also the amount of free stuff that we're trying to give. Now we've just allocated 25 billion to fund free day secondary education. And I think if you look at the returns on those investments, they're not commensurate with how much we're putting in, because there's so much waste. And at the end of the day, we're not even creating the quality education that will move this country forward, that will do the right thing for the young people who show up in schools. We have not evaluated the free primary education yet, and now we're piling in free secondary education. I think what we need to really think about is what really is the business of government. I think the government is all over the map.
And what is the business of government?
The business of government is basically to provide a stable environment, basically peace and security and regulation, and then get out of all this stuff. The government does all kinds of things that it shouldn't. It has too many drivers. It is not a transportation company. It is collecting things that it should not be collecting. I think there's just so many things the government should not do. And also part of the problem is that what the government then does also crowds out private enterprise and makes it very difficult for us to start new businesses, because the government is also another competitor. So I think we need to start thinking about the real structural issues that Mr. Kenyatta promised in 2013. He came in as a technocrat. We gave him the space to hire technocrats in his government, both as CSS and PSS. These guys have not done zilch. And I think if he succeeds going forward, then he has to restructure and fundamentally reform the public sector.
Okay, so let's start to...
Can I just make a point about the informal? I believe an informal sector exists. I think fundamentally you have three tiers. We've got micro, small, medium, and then large. And when you look at the space where informal people sit, they sit in the micro and small space, and they have very specific types of problems that often aren't felt to that extent by lack of productivity and profitability. If you look at the levels of productivity of a small informal firm, it's a fifth, a quarter of a formal firm of the same size. Okay. So there's certain, it's getting a bit technical, but there's certain features that you can say these are informal. And for my view, it's not so much that we should start taxing them. We should make them profitable, then they'll pay their tax. And they'll self-formalize. Because one of the problems they're in is that because they're informal and so broke, they can't qualify for county contracts and things like that. Right. But once you start getting them to a level where they're making money, the incentive to formalize begins to kick in. So I think those are the sorts of things that private sector can do in partnership with government, which is to start piloting profitability schemes, piloting formalization schemes, and getting small business and micro businesses to make more money so that they then start paying the taxes. Now, this is something that would take 10 years to do. Yeah. So this is something that a government has to be committed to and say, we're going to do this, we're going to pilot it, and in the next 5 to 10 years, you're going to begin to see the fruits. But one of the problems
have you seen that over the last five?
There are different pilots.
10 years? Yeah.
No, one of the problems that I'm saying is that because we're in a democracy, people always want to do things in 5-year tranches so that they can say we achieved this, we achieved this, which is why we're getting into some of this free stuff that, perhaps shouldn't be happening. But one of the broader concerns I'm having around the fiscal space is in my opinion, overcommitment to infrastructure without assessment. We've now been investing in infrastructure for 15 years, since Kibaki. That's when we started this drive. We have not gotten anywhere near the 10% of Vision 2030. Where is this multiplier effect? Why aren't we feeling it? We've been doing this for 15 years. So I think it's time. Fine, we need to do infrastructure. It's true, we have about an annual deficit of 2 to 3 billion in infrastructure for the next about 15 years. So we do need it. But what we need to do now is an infrastructure audit. Are we building the right infrastructure? Are we building it at the right price? Is it where people want it to be? Will people use it? So we need to do a fundamental audit if we're going to continue getting into this massive debt to pay for infrastructure. So I think there are certain things that we need to just take a step back on and be like, okay, how do we get Kenyans to understand that, for example, to build a revenue base, we need 10 years to do this. So we will tell you what can be achieved in 5 years, but really we need a certain level of continuity in government, which is another problem that we're having because of the political wrangles, is that no one wants to continue what the previous administration did. Yeah. So, there are all these things in the political economy that we're not having very sober conversations about.
Wasn't Vision 2030 supposed to be that common thread?
Yeah.
Phyllis?
I agree a lot with Anzetse on the long-term view. Yeah. A lot of the challenge we are having even on debt is because we are doing short-term decisions. Right. We need to be looking at 15, 20 years from now, making decisions for posterity.
What are some of those decisions?
Some of those decisions, in my view, are really growing the manufacturing sector. Because the fact is that manufacturing is the engine of any economy. Manufacturing involves a lot of capital investment. It's able to unlock productivity that eventually unleashes productivity even in agricultural sector. It has linkages to all sectors of the economy. There's a trajectory that the services sector can also make an economy grow, but I've read widely, and it cannot. Structural transformation in manufacturing and agriculture is what leads to growth. Services then benefits from that growth. And you get to a level where a country starts reducing in manufacturing and growing services. But before you hit that peak, you're doing something called premature deindustrialization. And if you do premature deindustrialization, you will have jobless growth. Your economy will grow, your GDP will grow, but you'll not have the jobs.
We are right now.
And if you look at unemployment numbers, 22% youth unemployment. That is a number that is not sustainable with the number of people we have getting out of schools, with the number of people we have in the economy. So really my focus is, for the next 15 years, can we commit to growing the manufacturing sector? Can we deal with competitiveness issues? Can we unlock productivity in agriculture? Can we open up new markets? Because manufacturing requires markets. Countries actually do a lot of strategic initiatives. If you look at Europe, I've visited countries where they have government financing their entry into market, hand-holding them to ensure they get into markets. Can we grow exports? That way we can unlock potential and create jobs.
Indeed. Yes. So let's start our round of closing comments. And that's you started that, actually.
Yes.
Alex, where do we need to be long-term? What are some of these things that we need to do?
I think long-term, we really need to see a pair of capable hands at Treasury. People who have backbone, who can stave off the political class and tell them these political promises are nonsensical. They do not make sense from an economic sound management perspective. I think that's what we're lacking right now. And I think the confusion really is Mr. Rotich the political head of the ministry, or is he the technocrat? Where is the space for his CS? Where does he get his counsel from? And how does he have the backbone to stand up to Mr. Kenyatta and say, enough of this government spending on things that we will not see the benefits over the short term.
So allow me to be the devil's advocate. So when you say that with the free spending, there's free day secondary education, and even that is not entirely free. But there's a parent out there who's saying, well, this is good for me. Well, that if I'm not spending X amount of money on taking my child to school, then that money might be used for something else, and that this is ultimately a good thing.
Well, the real question really is, where is the right balance? Is it social investment, or is it investment in the high infrastructure that then creates an opportunity for parents to actually pay school fees? What Ipsos has shown consistently is that when combined income at a household reaches 40,000 shillings, parents pull out their kids from primary school, from public primary school, and put them into private schools. So I think the real question really is, how can we step up labor participation and create employment so that people can actually go to work and begin to pay some of the bills? The government should invest in education, but not in terms of tuition. There are many other arrangements like conditional cash transfers to schools to improve standards. It's not really the money that you're giving and say you're waiving fees, but there are many ways to invest in a smart way to raise the standards of education. Now, the other point that I want to make very quickly is that our economy has been growing basically on public and private consumption and government spending. It is the consumption that you and I go out and buy that kicks up the service sector and how much money government is putting in. The government, as Phyllis has said, has not been able to figure out how do you invest in the private sector strategically to create those engines that then drive the economy and create the multiplier effect that enables manufacturing and agriculture to kick in to then create a durable service sector. Until we find the right balance, it's going to be very difficult for Rutish to get out of this mess. Because if you ask me, we've put in so much money in the SGR, we're not going to see that money in a very, very long time. Now we're already over capacity in electricity generation. We don't even need that. And they were told many times before we started this power generation thing that we will not be able to consume 6,000 megawatts in even 20 years. So we should slow down on this thing. So now that's dead. That is money locked in there. And there are many other things. And to Nzese's point, we need to set a serious, robust, candid audit of the investment in infrastructure in this country. Otherwise, this is down the rat hole.
Okay. And Nzese, your closing thoughts and comments and how I can hold my government to account for their spending.
I think Kenyans need to put more attention on county government. I think the national government is there, and it's very important, and we want accountability, and we want strategic thinking, etc. But I think we are underplaying the power of devolution, quite frankly, as Kenyans. One of the fundamental problems I'm having is that people want accountability from national governments, but they're not expecting that from county. When you look at the point of devolution was to get that money down to county level so that small, medium enterprises, etc., would thrive. So I think beyond the obsession with national, I think it's Kenyans really need to, for example, they need to comply with the Public Financial Management Act. They are not. There are really basic things that we can do, particularly at a county level, where we can really start to get our voices in, get some of the strategies that Phyllis and Alex are talking about, particularly around unlocking agricultural problems outside urban areas, and really moving into manufacturing and creating export centers. Because the reason why exports are so important is because we are hired to make goods for other people. So we are using our labor and getting jobs for us to make goods for other people. Right now, it's the other way around. We're an import economy, so we are hiring people outside to make goods for us. We need to reverse that.
Okay, all right. Phyllis, I'll have you.
For me, just in closing, I think we need to hold our governments accountable. We can't run away from the fact that governance is central for an economy. So the issue of public participation has to be at the center of everything. That starts from the county governments to the national governments to constantly holding leaders accountable for what they commit to do and what they promise to do.
So to attending those counties,
to giving comments on revenue bills,
on the budget and everything.
To giving our comments, to participating as citizens. And also, the other thing we need as Kenya is leaders who can lead us thinking about the long term. Because at the end of the day, we want to live a country that is better for our children. And we can't do it if we're only thinking about what is in it for me now. Sometimes we just have to be magnanimous and really think about creating a country that is better for future generations. So addressing the fundamental issues that have arisen in this period and in this year, all the way from governance to accountability to whether it's corruption, but all those big things, which if we get right, we can move our economy to the next level. We've seen countries like South Korea who are the same level with us, now at income per capita of about 22,000 and above. and we are at 1,500. So it can't be done, but it needs us as citizens to participate. It needs leaders to really rise up to the occasion and create a country that we leave for generations to come.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, that's Anzetse Were, Phyllis Wakiaga, and Dr. Alex Awiti. So, keep your views coming in. The hashtag is Checkpoint. That full conversation I had with the Cabinet Secretary is still coming up. We'll air it in its totality. We discussed all of these issues and, of course, much more, including that perception, why you feel, you know, a little depressed when it comes to your finances and the state of the economy. But those are their views as to where we need to go over the next 5, 10, 15 years. What are yours? The hashtag is Checkpoint. Keep it coming. We're taking a break. We'll be back. We have the day's sports news, plus my take is coming up as well.